Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a very special development seminar where we're discussing the many benefits and challenges of digital technologies in emerging economies. And we're delighted to have two special panelists here. One, Dr. Giri Tai, professor at SUNY Albany, and Rahul Mathan, partner at Trilegal, and a well-recognized writer and stakeholder in issues of technology and society. I'm Rahul Tongia, scholar at Brookings India, and for those who may not be as familiar, Brookings India is a not-for-profit research institution, has active verticals on sustainability and energy, human development and economics, as well as national security and foreign policy. But we also do a fair amount of work in the technology space, whether it's in digital rights issues or smart grids, smart cities, data. We have a lot of initiatives. So in continuation, how everything is interconnected, it brings a lot of these talks together. And this conversation is very interesting because digital technology hopefully isn't one of those things that it'll transform. It's the technologies of the future, but that day never quite comes. So the transformation is already ongoing, but as William Gibson put it, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So what is the potential, what are the issues? Digital has permeated. India does extremely well by many measures of digital. It has not only very high mobile penetrations, it has probably the world's lowest average revenue per user, which is the metric for telecom players on connectivity. So that's good for the consumers, but some of the telecom providers may be a little unhappy with that statistic. But certainly lack of technology per se isn't the bottleneck, even though technology is continuously evolving. But technology is very agnostic. Technology is an enabler for change, whether it's policy change, societal change, and so forth, business changes. And so there's lots of consequences of technology, and so we'll hear much more about both the positive capabilities of technology as well as the risks and the worries. So the format will be Professor Tai will speak for 30-40 minutes or plus or minus with his presentation, and then we'll request Rahul to share both thoughts, reactions, and some new ideas based on that. And then after a small Q&A between us, we'll open it up for questions. So,
hey, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for Brookings and Shamika to inviting me here to talk a few things about digital technologies. Thank you, Rahul, and thank you, Rahul, for agreeing to be a consultant and for Rahul to be the moderator for this one. So let me say a couple of words about how I'm going to talk about. First thing is I'm an academic. I'm not an expert. So that means I'm a work in progress guy. I do some work. I read. I meet people who are doing research in this area. So what I'm going to talk about here are really some ideas, thoughts, some concepts, and not any opinion, especially expert opinion. I'm just going to share with you what I have sort of gathered over some time. I've done some work in digital technologies in the form of journal articles, special issues, and things of that sort. But again, I'd like to emphasize that I'm an academic, I'm work in progress. So as Rahul mentioned, I'll sort of talk a few ideas. Digital technologies is really a vast area. There are so many angles, so many perspectives that it's very difficult to cover even a few of them in a short period of time. So if I don't cover one of your topics, especially favorite topics, please forgive me for that. The idea here, as Shamika put me when she got in touch with me, was to sort of just raise a set of issues, opinions, and ideas so that becomes the catalyst for people to talk about it, raise awareness, and to get familiar with what are the hot issues or current issues. So I'm trying to keep that in mind when I do this one. So here is a short introduction in the sense I'm a faculty at the State University of New York at Albany. I sort of come from a dual background. I have a business background, then I went to policy school at Carnegie Mellon like Rahul. Then having done policy work, I went back to the business school, but I never left policy. I have been doing research both in the business area as well as policy. This is one of those things where I would like to bring in both business and policy when you're looking at digital technologies, because I think that would give all the stakeholders a perspective on how things should be done moving forward, whether it be United States or whether it be India. It doesn't matter. That balanced perspective where all stakeholders are involved is a good perspective. So here is a short agenda I prepared. Again, we don't have to follow every item here, but this is again one thought, one slice of what my thoughts are. I start with what do we mean by digital, because a lot of people have a lot of meanings. A lot of things are digital. Then I sort of give a little peek at what is happening on the digital in India with some two very good examples of the impact of digital in India, which people may not know about. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about digitization score. Okay, everyone is digital. Who is more, who is less? How do we know that? Is India more digital than Malaysia, or Malaysia more digital than USA? Or some idea, people have developed something called digital score, and then try to link that to digital ecosystems. Really, digital technologies are not going to be viable if you're not going to have a digital ecosystem. We'll talk about that. Then I'll focus more on emerging economies, India, the digital tiger. Then switch gears and move into the digital technology risks and limitations, because many of us know about the benefits of digital technology because we are seeing it. Every time you take out your iPhone or Samsung or whatever it is and call Uber, you're seeing the benefit of digital technologies. So everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the risks and limitations, and then I'll focus a little more in depth the risks of using AI-based systems or digital technologies, because that's something which is sort of really coming on fairly fast around the world in India and other places. It's not just only in the United States. Then I will talk about some policy actions, given that we are here. That would be very appropriate, and also I have quite a bit of interest in that given my training. And then I'll try to see if I can give you a sense of one example from Canada, how they are trying to make policy in the AI-based technologies. And then finish up with concluding remarks. So that would be my agenda. So if you look at digital, what does digital mean? The word digital really comes from Latin, where digital means digitus or finger. And we all know fingers were the earliest counting tools. We had our fingers, that's where we were using that. Then came the abacus and all of those things came in. So digital is really very, very simple. One of the oldest one is your fingers, and we always give the example, I can count this on my fingers. It's no more than 2 hands worth of it. So so digital is that one. And when we say digital technologies or digital, we really don't mean it is a one particular device or one particular tool. Digital technologies today is a lot more broader. To be truthful, it is more a way of doing things rather than a thing. That is what really is the critical thing that we need to keep in mind when we say digital technologies, or when we say digitization or digitalization. If you go to some countries, they talk about digital. So digitalization or digitization is really the way you do things, vis-a-vis the way we used to do things in the past. So there are 3 characteristics which, at least from a business perspective, when we say it is digitization. One is digitization allows you to create new value at the frontiers. Let me give you a simple example. I come from a part of the United States called Northeast, where snow is a fairly regular phenomenon in the winter times. From November till March, we have snow. And one of the things we all do there is go for skiing. And in the area surrounding Albany, there's about 70 to 80 ski slopes where people over the weekend go, even during the weekdays, if they have a holiday, they go. And that's a nice way to have fun, and that's part of this thing. Now, just a few years ago, the weather forecasters used to predict only one thing. Is it going to snow or is it not going to snow? And that was more than adequate for a lot of people
to decide how to wear clothes, how to drive and all that, because I would just go to office. If it is going to snow, I'll drive carefully, or I'll go a little later, because being in academics, I can go whenever I want. So I'll let the traffic go and then I'll drive down. But in the last 5-6 years, the same weather company has completely changed. It gives you 5 types of weather forecasts. How does it do that? Because all the ski slopes and all these places, they have sensors which send in telemetry information. So if I'm a skier and I want to have a good time, I want to find out which of these 80 mountains or this thing has powder type of a snow. Because if the snow is powdery, I can glide down nicely, I have a great time, exhilarating time. But whereas if the snow is wet, you're going to be sloshing with your skis. So you suddenly see that the need for information has been so different for so many different people, whereas once upon a time we had just one information, whether it's going to snow, not snow, heavy, light, and that's it. Similarly, there are other customers who want that snow information, the delivery people. And it's very interesting that the delivery people want to know the timing of the snow, from where the snow will start, so west to east or east to west, north to south. So if you have a UPS guy who runs about 300 trucks in that region every day, he wants to know where the snow will start so that he can do everyday trucking based on that information. Now, why does he want to know? Because based on that information, he will reroute his trucks, not the way he did it yesterday, so as to have savings in his fuel consumption. And unlike you and me, it doesn't matter if we consume half a gallon more, but for him, if he can conserve 1 gallon every day from every truck, that is a big addition to the bottom line. So you suddenly see that frontiers of business. Now that is where the digital technology has come in, where you're pulling in the data from so many different places, processing it, all that data, and then passing on. So data which really had a very low value monetization has been able to monetize to a much this thing, where you have looked at each of these 4 or 5 customers who all need data about snow, but they want different characteristics of that snow. They've been able to do that. So that's one way to, and the another characteristic of digital technologies is looking at the consumer. How can I make, as a company, if I'm selling my product or services, how do I make it easy for the customer to buy the product, access the product, get the information about the product, and things of that sort? So my journey when I'm trying to buy a particular product, in the old days it would take a lot of time, but today with the online, my journey is completely different. I get free time from my children and everything at 10 at night. What happens if I want to go to the store? It's closed. But I'm sitting in front of my computer and I'm able to work for 2 hours going through all Flipkart, Amazon, all of those things, read reviews, read information, read this thing, and place the order at 12 o'clock at night before I go to bed, and then voila, 24 hours, 48 hours, I have my product. So that experiences, and same thing if you look at Urban Ladder in India, Wayfair, these are all huge furniture companies, online companies. And if you want to buy a sofa, they may have 5,000 different sofas. Now, I want to buy a sofa, how do I go and search? It's available there. So my job of searching and getting information and making the deal is very difficult. It's not easy, not smooth, even though the information is there. Now, what did Wayfair and Urban Ladder are doing? Okay, you want a sofa. Do you like the sofa of your friend whom you visit all the time? Yes, I like the sofa where I go and visit my friend. It's very comfortable. Take a picture. You have a smartphone. Bring it, put that picture on my website, and I will give you 10 sofas which I have in my inventory which are very close to that. Now, what is it that I have done? What is it that I have done? Made your search very easy. Try to give you what you want, what you already liked, rather than giving you 1,000 of them. So that is where you're bringing in digital technology, image recognition, all of those things put together, pulled together, and that is what really, when we say digital technology means, it's not one particular device. So the idea here is, how do we take that information, send it out, put it in, help the consumer to traverse that journey in as smooth, frictionless, seamless kind of a this thing that the firms are trying to do. And the same thing can be done on the other side. The government can use some of these technologies to make land search easy for a poor farmer to find out where is my this thing, what are the prices for a variety of things, where do I get my this. So the same thing, that's why I said I like to mix the business and the policy, because there is really a lot of synergy to be obtained if we can do it smartly in an intelligent way. And the last one, which is very typical, is building the foundational capabilities. These things don't happen overnight. If you look at the foundational things for Uber and Ola to make it. These are the kinds of things that have happened over time. For that, the availability of the networks, availability of this thing, and all of those things is part of that digital this thing. So what we talk about, a key feature of digitization is building those networks that connect people, objects, devices, which could be spread all over the place without any distinction of time and distance. Without any distinction of time and distance, saying that today is morning, tomorrow is Monday, that kind of a distinction. So that's really what we mean by digitization. It's the way you do things. And to do that thing, we use a variety of technologies, variety of devices, and then produce that one. So here is a good example of what is happening in India. This is a little bit old, December 10, 2015. And you may be surprised that this happens in India, and it happened 4 years ago. A lady was traveling on this train, Varanasi to New Delhi, and she ran out of milk, and she had a small baby. And the baby, you know what happens. There is no milk, she's crying and all that stuff. So the mother tweets at 11:03, tweets. So you see the social media tweet. And the Ministry of Railways swung into action. The railways had a handle. They were looking, there was someone in the railways looking at it, and that person, whoever it is, informed the DRM, the Divisional Railway Manager of Allahabad, to take action, which led him to go to the station master of Fatehpur, that's where the train is going to be coming next, and tell him to provide milk to this mother who is in such and such a bogie or whatever it is. And this happened at 11 o'clock, 11:47, you have this. Now think about this happening 10 years ago. And can anyone think about this happening in India? But it happened. How did this happen? What took for you to make this happen? So the classic case of how an unmet need was fulfilled in a short time by leveraging different aspects of the digital technology along with the physical. Someone had to go get the milk, physically bring it and give it, but making that happen. So in this digitization, what is it that we have done? We have figured out where is the need for information. We took that information, we brought it together, merged it, and then made that happen. And that is what we mean by digitization, delivering a digital. This is not selling Amazon product. This is some social kind of this thing. This is what railways customer service is all about. So railways can make this kind of a customer service just the way Amazon makes this kind of a service, where you place an order 12 hours, even 4 hours in the United States, they will deliver it. It's the end of. So the railways can also. And notice that this service was provided not to some of the elite of the society. It was provided to not to the stereotypical young urban Delhi-based English-speaking woman. It was provided to someone from a village in UP traveling from Varanasi to Delhi. So this is really what we are talking about as an example of what digital solutions or digital technologies can enable you to have on this one. This is one great example I always use. Then another example which is very, very recent. Here is a farmer in Maharashtra last year flattened his whole crop because the whole crop of cotton was destroyed because of a pest. And he couldn't do anything because he didn't know that pest was there. And he didn't know what to do. So the problem was he couldn't intervene at the right time, and he didn't know what kind of solution. He has no expertise. And here is, because the normal way is you have extension workers of government who walk around this thing, they look at the traps they have put in and then tell the farmer what he or she should do. But then here you have an AI-based pest management system developed locally in India by Wadhwani Institute of AI in Mumbai. So what does this have? They've done. They are using pictures. A farmer can himself take pictures of the leaf. And those pictures then can be uploaded and the AI classification, this thing can tell you by looking at the picture, is this leaf the right kind of leaf, or is it already infected by this one? And that is immediately the system will tell you, once it is classified as being afflicted, the system can tell you what to do. What to do. This is interesting, again, AI-based application. I'm not talking about a consumer-oriented business, this thing, but this is a very much for India, the farming community, the farming sector, agriculture sector. Then the same thing in the context of healthcare in the Indian countryside. Virtual weighing machine. Virtual weighing machine. Again, the same Wadhwani Institute of AI in Mumbai is developing this a virtual machine where it can help the maternal and the children's health in the country. Imagine in a rural area, you have a child born. How long does it take for the child to get weighed and all those things? Here is your simple smartphone-based technology where one of the Anganwadi persons or whoever it is, he or she will go and take a 5-second video of the newly born, 5 seconds. And given that 5 seconds and you upload it, and that will tell you all of this information. Provide accurate, tamper-proof, geotagged. That is, it will tell you where this child is. You don't have to write it down with wrong address, wrong street, and all that geotagged. This information is given. Now imagine what the healthcare people can do with this information. Right? Again, very simple, and today with the penetration of mobile phones and smartphones, and especially if these are healthcare workers going around the villages, they can easily be given the smartphone, and a 5-second video of the child could give you. So these are the two which I thought would be two examples of what is going on in terms of digitalization in India, not from United States or from Europe, but this is something. So the idea behind digitization is, how do you know how much digitization has happened? Here is a company called Booz & Co. They have developed some metric or a score called Digitalisation Score, which is based on certain components. And each of these components has a proxy, and the information about this proxy indicator is available publicly everywhere. Anyone can look at it. Every country you will be. First indicator is ubiquity. How easy it is in that country to access digital services and applications, and the proxies for this is number of personal computers. Because the more personal computers you have, the greater the access, at least that is the way. Then affordability. How easy is it for people to buy? Pricing, geo plan, data plans, all of these things. So you have mobile prepaid tariff, broadband internet tariff. So these are all some of the indicators. Then reliability. A lot of us have this issue once upon a time, calls failing, right? That was the thing. So reliability, quality, and consistency of the connection. Then speed. How quickly can we get it? Okay, I have connection, I have the computer, but I got to wait. I hit the return button and it is spinning, spinning, spinning. So what happens with that? After about 4 or 5 times, I stop using it. Then usability is ease of getting online and ease of use. That also has a factor in how well you are digitized. And then finally, the skill. I'm not at all skilled in using this thing because very rarely I use it in office. But if you talk to a young person, he or she says that I am very savvy with this thing because I'm using it so this thing. So all of these things play into your digitization scores, and they then came up with this economies. They looked at the entire world, all the 200-odd countries, and they said a couple of countries are constrained economies where the score, digitization score, is below 25. Then some of the countries are emerging economies, score is between 25 and 30. That is, we have a lot of progress made. A lot of people have affordability, but still not to the par. That is, your services may not be that reliable. Then you have the transitional. This is where I would put India to be, is the transitional, just the borderline between emerging and transitional, because we have made in the last couple of years quite a bit of progress. And this is where you find that it is relatively ubiquitous. Everyone, even if you go to a remote village today, you find that person there has a phone, is able to make some connection, may be able to. So, and then you have advanced. Now the interesting thing is, apart from the score, digitization has been shown to have a direct impact on economic growth. Direct impact on economic growth. And what we are saying is that the GDP per capita, for every 10% increase in the digitization score, for every 10% increase in the digitization score, the GDP per capita in transitional economy goes by 0.6%. 0.6%. In the emerging economy is 0.5%. Whereas if you just did access only, you just provide access but no digitization, no nothing, the increase is only 0.16%. So you can see the gap, what digitization buys you for different economies. For every 10% increase in that score, if you go from 29 to 31 point this thing, you find that your GDP goes up by this one. So there has been a fair amount of correlation there, or causality too, between digitization and economic growth, and that's really why countries and governments are really looking at digitization as a way to increase your economic growth, one easy way to do that. So digitization, as I said, just having technology does not work. You need to build an ecosystem, and that is the hard part. That is where the hard part comes in, is building the ecosystem. I will give you some simple example of truck drivers in India. Before the GST came, where every state had its own tax, the mileage they could go in a day was 150 kilometers. And now they say that once GST came, when you take out all the states, taxes and all these things, it has gone up from 150 to 280 kilometers. Almost twice as much, which is still smaller than what happens in the United States. United States per day, 8 hours is 600 miles. So you can see the gap in the economic growth. If your products take that much longer to go from one end to the other, you find that you got to carry a lot of inventory, which is money being locked up without giving you any return for that one. So you find that ecosystems are really very, very important. So if you look down the pike in the next 5 years, this is where the action is, because so far your microwave, your refrigerator, they're all individual appliances. 5 years from now, they'll all be on a network. Already it is happening in the US. They're all connected. They're all connected. Now what does that mean? That means once they're connected, I can do things from a remote location. If I'm getting late today coming from home, and I left the thing in the oven, I can turn on the oven. I have heating and cooling systems which I've lowered when I'm leaving, but I can raise them so that there's a perfect timing. 30 minutes is my drive, and I turn on, and all that thing, where do I do it? From my iPhone. From my iPhone. So you find that a lot of appliances today are being designed in the United States so that they will be connected. That means, how do you do that? I am the guy who produces the appliance. You are the guy who produces something else. But I need to connect it. That means we got to talk to one another in designing our products. We need to collaborate. We need to cooperate so that our standards, my refrigerator can talk to you. That's where you're looking at how the technology of Bluetooth, which has already been there, being leveraged to do some of those things. That is what Amazon's Alexa, Google's their assistant, on all of this. Now, that is only the first front of the thing. There is a backside to it. That's what I'm going to talk a little bit about, the risk of doing all of that. And I believe you don't get any benefit without paying a cost. You think that you only get benefit and no cost. That doesn't work. There is no free lunch. There is no free lunch. So you find that a lot of these things you'll find. So you're finding that today I can monitor my home when I'm here away from my home for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. I monitor my home remotely from my iPhone because I put in cameras, and I have a service which allows me to link my cameras to the online internet, and I look at what does my living room look like, what is my hot water furnace, where is this and that. Of course, I also tell my neighbors, hey, keep an eye on that. And this is something which we do fairly regularly. It's now become very common. And also, my remote system is connected to the local police station if there is anything happens. So you find that that kind of a connection system. So you find that a lot of appliances, Samsung, all of these guys are working to build this, this thing into it. And again, a part of the digital ecosystems is something like Amazon has been doing, called a Dash. Again, great feature. It's a small device which sits in your washing room right above your washer. And you are a couple who is very busy, have two small children, they don't have time to go to the supermarket and get their laundry detergent. So while they are doing laundry, they come to know that they don't have laundry. You got to go to the supermarket, get it, or you need to ask someone. So they have a button. Amazon has created an IoT-based button. Now think about how they have done it. You have Wi-Fi in your home, which is always connected to outside. And Dash is a small IoT inside. The only thing the person, he or she, needs to do is push that Dash button. And what does that do? It sends a message to Amazon. And it knows that it is your button, it has your email address, it has your Prime number, it has everything, and goes to Amazon, and tomorrow evening you have your Tide detergent sitting in front of your door. Now, how did that happen? It didn't happen just because Amazon had a box of Tide. It needed that ecosystem. That is, every house has a good Wi-Fi and all of that. You're already a Prime member. There is a UPS who knows that. And then what if you pushed it and after about half an hour, your spouse comes and tries to push it? Because he or she didn't know that you pushed it. There is an intelligence built into it. There is an email or text message come to your phone saying, do you need 2 boxes? Now again, what we are doing is we are finding that this ecosystems, which really requires you to have a network of companies, individuals, institutions, customers, they come together and create the value. And that is really where the bang for the buck comes in, that is where you really need to create that. That is something which is going to take time, and that requires a lot of stakeholders to come together and make this happen. But basically, that is what you want, and that's where some of people like Apple, Google, they are the ones who are initiating by becoming the platform owners, who create the platform around which these ecosystems are built in, and these are the guys who create the operating system, your Android or iOS or Google search. So all of these, and then people develop apps for that. Those things are then linked together, and then suddenly you have, and that is where this ecosystem give you what is we call super additivity. Super additivity, that is, if you just had these 3 or 4, if you add them together, you'll get 10, but if you add them all together, smartly, it could give you 20, this kind of a synergy. That's what these things are. So this is where you're finding today movement towards different industries, collaborating, competing to create value, and that is what the digital ecosystems are about. And having those are really going to have a big impact on this. So that is where a lot of economies are trying to go, and India is poised to do some of those things. Poised to do, that is where you need innovation, you need balanced regulation, you need encouragement, all of these things for you to. So if that balance is not done properly, ecosystem formation will not happen, and that in turn will not help you, even though you may have individual technologies. You have a lot of cloud computing, storage, and all of that stuff, but it will not be much unless you don't have this kind of this thing. So here we are talking about a little bit about India, especially the digital tiger as it is called today. If you look at India, there is interesting thing is going on, the consumption expenditure. Consumption and expenditure in India has been growing at the rate of 12%, which is almost twice as much as any other country. Because we have a large population, young population which is becoming affluent. If you think about the demand for Zomatos and Swiggies, that should tell you what is the consumption expenditure is all about, which 5 years ago, we didn't have that much. But today, you find almost all metro areas, you find these guys driving around with this thing. So if you look at, and will become the 3rd largest consumer market by 2025. If you look at the Indian household income, they have BCG has done a proprietary work. They have divided the Indian household incomes into 5 categories: elite, affluent, aspirers, next billion, and strugglers. And the 2 top income classes are the fastest growing, the 2 top, elite and the affluent. And from 2016 to 2025, the share of elite and affluent household increased from 8 to 16%, and by 25 it will be even, whereas for the strugglers who are at the bottom, their share is dropping, which means that a lot of people are coming out of that strugglers this thing. That means they're all potential customers. If I'm a customer like a company like Amazon, they're all potential customers for me. So an important this thing is that these consumer behaviors now are changing the pattern in which we consume things, how we buy, how frequently, where we buy, and what devices we are going to use. Are we going to walk down to the place, or are we going to sit in front of our this thing, or are we going to use? So this has a great implication. So here is a pictorial about income distribution in India from 2005 to 2025. If you look in 2005, how small that area is. Elite is people who make more than $30,000 a year. So it was just about 1.5%. But if you go to 2025, they'll be about 5%. And if you look at both the elite and affluent are making more than 15,000 but below 30,000 per year, US dollars. So you find that they will be about 16% there. Whereas if you look at the bottom, the strugglers, in 2005, they were 93%. But by 2025, they'll be almost half, 55%. That's a great reduction in this. So it's an interesting, this one, for us to get a sense of how the Indian market is changing. And this has implication for digitization. This has implication both for the government as well as for the business and the commercial entities. So what are the different factors which are driving this growth in the Indian digital consumer market? Is obviously affluence. And we are finding that the elite and the affluent will become about 40% when compared to 27% by 2025. That's a large chunk of this one. Then urbanization. We all know it is happening, but it is kind of interesting. The urbanization here is different from other Asian countries. Obviously in China, very, very fast urbanization. In a place like Indonesia, Thailand, it's all concentrated. Fortunately for India, it is happening in several cities. Every major city in the major part of the country is a big city, metro, and things of that sort. So, and then what we are finding is the consumption of expenditures are going dramatically high in tier 2, tier 3 cities. Tier 2, tier 3 cities. And the people in tier 2, tier 3 cities are different from the people in metro areas and consumer one cities. And that is, to a large extent, they have high purchasing aspirations, but availability of product is still constrained because of our infrastructure, our supply chain capabilities. As I said, our trucks go only 280 kilometers. But for that to increase, adding more trucks doesn't do it. We got to improve the infrastructure. We got to improve the ecosystem for the trucking organization. That's how we do it. So here, if you look at, again, the affluence, how it is spreading across India by 2025. If you look at here, those circles tell you the cities where the percent of elite and affluent households. In 2016, there were 0 cities where the affluence and elite and affluent were more than 40%. But by 2025, it is going to be 48 cities, which will have a share more than 40 between those two income levels. And you can see how those circles are there, different kinds of circles. Again, interesting idea to give you a sense of where the consumer market in India is going and how firms would like to, and what would be the way in which the government, what is the role for it to play in this. So then the shifting family structures, we all know about this one. So the interesting things which companies and governments need to pay attention to is in this family structure, people will be younger, more optimistic, and more tech savvy. More tech savvy. They all are going to be using their smartphones. doing everything on the smartphones. So we got to look at the positives and the negatives. What are the issues when people use heavily their smartphones for doing a variety of things? So coming to some risks and limitations, here is something which everyone knows. Technologies do not have any purpose. They are purpose agnostic. What makes them good or bad is our actions and our choices. What choices we make in terms of technology, what actions we make, that is what really makes it. So technologies, if you look at steam engine, or even before that, they've done good, they've also done harm. So that's what we call the technological duality. With the technology, you have this plus and minus. Now the question comes in is how you balance that one. So technologies like AI and machine learning will displace jobs, but also will improve your work environment. You have a hazardous environment, you will have a robot going and doing it, not individuals. Especially in Indian kind of a context, we have all the sewage system being cleaned by humans. And we have been reading all the time on the number of people dying because of that. And we as a society cannot let that happen. We got to have robot coming in and filling in that one. So surely there will be job losses, but then the work environment. So you'll have that. Similarly, you'll have different kinds of issues with work, more upskilling and things of that sort. But then we also could have a lot more personalized care, a lot more disease prevention, epidemics. That is where AI being used in the United States and other places is today, come the winter time, companies have figured out how the cold or the flu season is propagating using different kinds of means. Some simple thing is your Google search. They're able to predict how that wave of flu, which happens every year during the winter time. So the similar kind of thing. So the deployment will require new skills. We all have to do, but at the same time, education becomes more accessible. We find that happening in India quite a bit already. The other day I was reading someplace, a teacher was using WhatsApp and other things to help other teachers to plan their courses and help the students with their homework and all. Something which will never could have happened, but this is what we are finding. So they will not improve human well-being on its own. Technology cannot do it. It is the people, that is both the policymakers and the business leaders need to develop an agenda where they got to come together and say, how are we going to use technology? What choices are we going to make? And how are we going to mitigate the downside of digitization, both in the short term and the long term? So that is where we are talking about. That is all stakeholders. Tech companies, large and small businesses, researchers, policymakers, society itself, as have to bring together not just technology, but also regulation, observation of outcomes, and debate. That is, got to think about some of these things. These are fairly important things. And in those debates, you got to have every viewpoint. Not majority, not minority, but every viewpoint has to be brought in. So, as I said, I'll spend a little time looking a little more deeply into AI-based systems, because those are being used quite a bit, not just in the United States or Korea or China, but everywhere in the emerging economies. If you look at our own this thing, companies are using this. But one of the problems with AI systems are typically what we call black box systems or opaque systems. That is, we don't know what's going on in that system. And they're highly susceptible to bias, because AI systems are trained on data. Now, if that data is outdated data, the decisions made by the AI will be outdated. If the data is coming from one segment of the population, then it is going to reflect all of that into your decision, even though you're using that for a broader segment of the population. So you find that this one, so here is a typical example. The AI systems lack transparency, and you don't know why it is doing what it is doing. A 41-year-old white male and an 18-year-old black woman both commit similar crimes, but when you assign risk, the white male is assigned low risk, the black woman is assigned high risk. How did it do it? We have no idea. And if you try to probe it, a lot of companies will say that the way the algorithm or the system works is proprietary. The data is proprietary, so it becomes very difficult to challenge in a law in a court of how these systems are working, what is the logic behind it. So one of the things a lot of regulators in US and other places are doing is they're mandating that when you use an AI system, the AI system should be explainable. That is, your system should explain how exactly it arrived at that particular decision. But that is, if you are lending, if you're a bank and if you're used an AI system and you've said you can't get the loan, you got to explain what is the reason why I didn't get loan. Is my income the problem, or I'm a risk guy? What is the factors? Got to be explained. But this explanation is also still not good enough because there are lots of challenges in that one. One, as I said, is companies will say the way we run is proprietary. We can't give you the information. We can't give you the data. And then more than that, the AI algorithms are not simple. They're not like adding 2 + 2 = 4. I can explain it. A lot of the AI systems are complex, nonlinear neural networks. Now, what does that mean? That means they take a lot of data. They don't take 1 or 2 pieces of data, your age and your salary, and then decide. They take a lot of data. Maybe how many years you spent going to school, which part of the country did you work. Lots of data, that is thousands of inputs, where each input contributes only a small fraction into the decision. And trying to explain that becomes very, very difficult. As a result, we find that we got to make a trade-off between fidelity and accuracy, correctness, precision. So that is really one of the big problems with AI systems. And then the other big issue with AI systems is a statistical problem called Simpsons paradox. That is, your decision is driven by an underlying unobserved variable. A variable is deciding your decision or your recommendation, and I cannot observe that one. This is a very, very common statistical problem. That is, if you look at this one, people have asthma. Your rule says, your recommendation says, oh, he has asthma. That means very low risk of dying from pneumonia. So then you may say that you don't have asthma, so that means you are going to die quickly. That's not the reason. Why is that happening? Because people who have asthma have better treatment, better care. And that is what is driving, and that you are not observing it. So this is a very common thing which happens. So you got to question that system. Now, who is going to question the system? I as a consumer will do it, or will the government force it to do it? So that is where the next thing which is happening is we are talking about auditing of AI systems. Now, what do we mean by auditing? Our books, the way we have companies being audited, we need to have this, and it needs to be done by a neutral third party using hypothetical cases. Okay, you're doing lending. Give me the system, I will check it, I will test it, I will audit it using hypothetical cases. Now you have said no because I'm a male. Now supposing if I were female, what will your system say? Supposing I'm a minority, what will the system say? Supposing I don't speak the language, what will the system? So this way, so the goal is to check AI systems for bias and brittleness. And you may find that AI systems could break, that is brittleness, or may reflect bias, that is they are giving a positive result if so-and-so is there, but if you have the same characteristics, but a different person is giving you opposite. So you find that what happens if you change the gender of the defendant? What happens if the applicant comes from a minority community? What will be the decision? Will it be? So auditing is becoming a one big thing in the United States, is auditing of the AI systems, complementing explanation. You got to explain how your system operates, and then I would like to audit. Both complements one another. Because so a simple example, Netflix we all use, it recommends, say it recommended Twilight Zone, a science fiction movie, because I watched Stranger Things, another science fiction movie. Now, will it also recommend other science fiction stories, or will it only recommend Twilight Zone? Maybe it may recommend Twilight Zone because those guys paid money to Netflix. That could be a thing, advertising. Or will Netflix recommend everyone who has watched Stranger Things, Twilight Zone, or will it recommend only to me? I would like to check it out and see. So early examples of auditable AI are having a positive impact, especially this civil society organization called the American Civil Liberties Union. They audited the Amazon's facial auto recognition system and were able to show that that recognition system nearly twice as likely it says that people with color are not being identified properly. That means they will deny them permission to enter the building. Whereas if it is a white person, no problem, even though he may be highly risky. So they were able to do that. So there is a growing evidence that public audits are becoming very important for AI systems. So we saw the positive thing, as I gave you the example of the pest using AI for classifying the leaf and figuring out what, that's fine. But there are these kinds of things which you have. So we are finding that there is a need to develop a robust ecosystem. When we are doing this, bringing in these systems, we also need, just the way we have for our books, we have an ecosystem of auditors, chartered accountants, and things of that sort. So we need to have this to gain insight into how individual systems which people are being exposed to, whether it be a bank, whether it be a hospital which is using this AI system to diagnose you or this thing. I want to know whether they're diagnosing it properly or not. Can I check it? Can I get a seal of approval that this AI system is fair, it doesn't discriminate, it doesn't misalign, and things of that sort. So this is where we are finding that the role for government comes into picture fairly heavily, regulators. But one of the important things we need to remember, it is with some hard work we can de-bias an AI system. But it could take, it's a lot more difficult to de-bias a human being. This is something which we have found in a lot of our AI de-biasing thing is humans are a lot more difficult to de-bias. AI system, we can do something, bring in new data, bring in new model. We can struggle and then de-bias it, but humans are tough nuts. Because by the time we start making decisions, we are already biased. Because right from the time we come out and start in the home, we are this thing. So it's interesting. So what are the policy actions which one can think about? One is for the digitization technologies. As that comes in, there is no stopping it. What can governments do? What type of policy? One, obviously, access to infrastructure. Through policies, through investments, through regulation standards, we got to increase access to this one. Otherwise, some people will be left out. The digital divide kind of thing will happen. Public Wi-Fi, that's what is happening now. You find a lot of times, many public places like railway stations, airports, and all of those things, this thing. And then something which Rahul's forte, legal frameworks to be put in place so that people can access some of these things in a fair, undisputed. Then digital inclusion is again one of the things. It's not just getting access, but also access to a panoply of services. That is, I should be able to easily pay my bill, not just only you because you have high speed this thing, or I need to be in a position to download the app and use the app. So a variety of things is digital inclusion. Then digital ID, Aadhaar card, and all of those kinds of things, a powerful tool for connecting citizens to the public services so that I have access to public services because I am paying my taxes, I have a right to access those things. Adopting technologies in government itself should adopt, not use a paper-based this thing for land records and this thing. Make it digitized so that tamper-proof and things of that sort, fraud could all be eliminated. Imagine that happens, what will happen in the rural areas where your deeds and these things are tamper-proof. Finally, governments have relatively new investment. That is the big thing which you'll find now on the radar of governments is data privacy, data protection. All of those things will become very important. And another area where governments in the United States and other places in Singapore, other places are doing open data. That is, open the data which the governments have, census data, other data, because it's public property, that data, so that companies can come in and develop new tools, new software, new apps using that, and people can look at what is the data, accountability. transparency, openness. So this is a big movement we find. India is slowly getting into that one, but otherwise a big area of our digital technologies is this. And obviously, government has to become a critical regulator for data rights, data usage, and privacy information, especially personal information. Irrespective of who the individual is, it should be across the same. I think Supreme Court has given that in India recently. Data privacy is a human right, is what they have talked about. So lots of countries are moving forward. European Union has done this, GDPR. India is trying to do that one. There is a Sri Krishna Commission which has been set in place, which is trying to formulate or help this one. But so one example which goes a little deeper of how government agencies are coping with AI-based systems, and I took the example of Canada. Canada very recently came out with this document called Directive on Automated Decision Making, especially in its government agency. If a government agency is using an AI system, what are the different steps it needs to do before it can use that? So here is a very this thing. So what they call that document is called Algorithmic Impact Assessment Tool. Now this tool will rank all AI systems and the risk they create to the individual who receives that product from that system, the community or the ecosystem on a scale of 1 to 4. Very interesting. So if you are using, if a company, if a government agency is assigning campsites, I as a tourist in the summer, I want to camp and I need to go to a campsite and I go online and then fill out a form and they'll say, okay, this is the place, this is the number, and you get a assignment, just like booking a railway ticket. So an algorithm, if it is doing it, and given that it is that since the risks are so low, the rank rating is given 1. Whereas if you're looking at an AI system, if this is a regulatory agency which is trying to regulate toys, whether the toy is harmful to child or not and things of that sort, so they have developing standards. So they have an AI system which scans the social media. Why does it scan the social media? Because people would have said, hey, this toy is very dangerous. They want to get all that information, scanning and all that stuff, and then talk to the manufacturers and then develop a regulation or a standard for that. And that is a system which they don't find too much risk, a ranking of 2. An algorithm which identifies debtors, who are the people who are not paying their bank dues and things, who are they need to be investigated, which has a lot of risks, a lot of this thing for the individual reputation and all of those kinds of things. Those kinds of AI systems are serious. They get a rating of 3. And then drug approvals. If you have a system you are using to grant approvals, you are going to give a rating of 4, which is, now given this rating, we find that the agencies are required to do several things. One is high-risk decision need external peer reviews. Outside parties have to come and look at this AI system and say, if the AI system is doing the right thing, is it biased or is it taking all the information into account? Is it using the right data? Things of that sort. And if it is not, that could be overridden by the humans. So that was some of the key questions they want the agencies to ask when the AI system is being used. How was the AI system developed? Who collected and who controls the data which they have used in the training? Because that will tell you what are the biases which were there when those things were collected. Because if you think about it, when we collect the data, there is a bias already built in there. Because why did I choose to collect this data, not that data? Right? Why did I use county by county data rather than town by town or village by village data? Yes. So does the system provide an audit trail that records, or does the system produce reasons for its decisions? So all of these questions the agency is supposed to ask before they can use the AI system if it has being used for high risk kind of decisions. All risk levels will require government agency in question to explain the AI decision to the affected party. Okay, you didn't get this ration card. Why didn't you get it? Here's a clear explanation, unambiguous and unbiased explanation why you didn't get it. Because you did not give us your birth certificate, that's why we couldn't give it. If you bring it, we'll. So the idea there is saying, whereas the level 2 requires publishing a notice. Level 3 requires posting information about the system, how the system works, who developed it, how it was developed, so that I can question how they developed it. Their methodology is not right, their data is not. So the idea there is for people to look into it. That is, throw some sunlight on how the system is working. So to conclude, some of the thoughts I have are as a pointers. One is continue and accelerate digitization. Government is doing several things. I listed some. Most of you are familiar with this one. Digital India, Bharat Broadband, all of these things, we got to really invest more, accelerate that one. Then the other area where India is still not up to mark is open government data. We have opened several data sets, but opening alone is not, can I access them? Are they in a format where I can do machine-to-machine talking and things of a variety? Open government data has lots of impediments before it can be used by the civil society or by companies to develop new product, new services. Develop comprehensive regulatory frameworks for data privacy, data protection, and data security. That is a very, very big thing, is a breach. Then create an environment that supports and encourages digital technology, products, services at all levels of human activity. It's not just for the business, even for entertainment, even for transactions, a variety. That's why I put all levels of human, this thing, government has a role to play, where the role is to encourage and nurture innovation. Because if you just go the route of regulation only, it could stamp out innovation. We really need to have both going on in a very balanced, in a very considered kind of a fashion. So those are some of my thoughts on this, and now it's up to Rahul.
Thank you, Giri. I won't do a deep introduction of Rahul Mathan, but he's a partner at Trilegal heading the Technology, Media and Telecommunications practice. Did I get the title right?
Absolutely.
And in addition to being a columnist who's been writing now for several years, I think, on these issues, he's also assisted the government in the privacy law, the commission, the Sri Krishna committee, and over to you, Rahul.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor. All okay?
Yeah.
I find this little difficult, this discussion role. I usually prepare my remarks. This feels more like stand-up, where I'm going to respond to what's happening, and the pressure is a lot more. So I'm going to give it a shot. I never do these things without preparation. But I thought the discussion. Oh, is that better? Check. Is that better? Okay, so much better. So I thought we covered a lot in that presentation. It was really a really wide-ranging presentation. It's difficult to get an angle to this that I think will be useful to everyone. But I think one of the things that I was struck with is that when we think about these issues, we tend to bring perspectives to the issue that it's as much important where you come from as what you're looking to address. And I just want to take the AI piece to start with. The challenge with AI is that AI has a huge amount of benefit. And at the same time, with all that benefit comes all the negatives, which is, there's bias in the algorithm, there's bias in the underlying training data. But does that matter when it solves a problem? And let me put it this way. If AI gets it wrong and sentences a man to death, that's terrible. That's really heinous. But if AI is able to figure out whether a biopsy is cancerous or not, and it will only be able to do that if it applies some black box algorithm that you cannot explain, do we really care? And very often the decision in regulating AI is the trade-off between accuracy and explainability. And we've got to try and figure out when we want to stick with the explainability and when we want to rely, hell with the explainability, let's just get the accuracy. And that's a difficult trade-off for a regulator to do. When I was listening to the presentation, I think one of the things that really struck me right from the beginning is that technology has done something marvelous for us, which is it's democratized data. And throughout the presentation, there were examples of how that democratization of data really has benefits. I'd like to sort of look at it from, in a sense, an Indian perspective. And I think it's really important for us to understand that we are potentially the first country, it's been said before, I'm just rephrasing it, we're potentially the first country in the world to become data rich before we are economically rich. And if that is a fact, we've got to find some way to use the richness of our data to help enhance our economic prosperity. Now, how do we do that? Because if you saw the numbers, I mean, as nice as it looks to see that people are coming out of the strugglers to the next billion, together, the people that we're talking about is in the region of 600 to 700 million people. Now, that's a staggering number of people that are still marginalized. And the problem that we are solving is there. It makes little sense for us to solve the problems of the elite, because the elite, all of us sitting in the room who've got this, air-conditioned comfort and the ability to order an Ola or an Uber when you go out and go home is less relevant solving those problems. We've got to use this data richness to solve the problems lower down. And I think India's made some remarkable strides in that direction. And I'd like to spend just a little bit of time elaborating some of those examples as well, which is a complement to the examples that were discussed so far. Of course, critical to all of this is a digital ecosystem, and we've been building a digital ecosystem, in a sense, step by step. Today, over 1 billion people have got a digital identity. Whatever you may feel about the other scheme, the benefit of leave aside the benefit of an identity, but the benefit of a digital identity will only just be discovered as you start layering on top of that first layer all the other digital elements, which we're starting to see. This last month, UPI crossed 750 million. At its peak, it hit 800 million transactions a month. That's a staggering number of transactions, digitally. And if, while we were representing before the Supreme Court on the Aadhaar matter, when you talk about Aadhaar-enabled payments, we tracked where the payments are going to and from. And the largest corridor of payments was from Mumbai to Bihar. We wondered why that was the case, and you dig a little deeper into that particular statistic, and you find that it's essentially payments that are going from migrant workers in Mumbai who are sending it back home. And what was even more interesting was, because it's Aadhaar-enabled payments and it's biometrically enabled, and this is the layer on top of the digital identity, it was going directly to the hands of women. And so on the one hand, you are eliminating the arbitrage that a Hawala a participant in the Hawala industry was going to impose on the transfer of money, because but for this, the only way they could get the money back home is to give it in cash to someone who would carry it back to the village, or through the Hawala mechanism, doesn't physically carry it, but it will be paid there. And obviously that person's going to take a cut in the middle of the process. So you eliminate that one barrier. And then in addition to that, we know that traditionally women in rural conditions do not have that much access to their bank accounts or to sources of funds, because the elders in the village tend to take a more parochial approach to it and go and collect the money on their behalf, when that's another layer where money doesn't get to them directly. But with a biometric payment system, there is no option but for the woman to actually go put her biometrics down and get the money. The other advantage that we saw was in this scheme called Jeevan Praman. Jeevan Praman essentially translates to proof of life, but proof of life is the key ingredient for the payment of a pension.
And the problem with pensions was that the only way you'd get your pension was if you stand up in front of a collector and say, look, here I am, I'm standing, so I deserve my pension. But of course, for some people that meant a 2-day journey. And sometimes the cost to actually go and collect the pension was not worth the pension that you were getting. Jeevan Praman allows you to actually use your biometrics because that's a great proof of life. The fact that you were there and you're putting your finger on the biometric reader. So there are these additional layers on top of digital identity that are already starting to pay off. And last week I was in Mumbai for the launch of something called the account aggregator system. I don't know, it's not been covered that much in the media yet, but this is another revolutionary step on top of digital identity. What the account aggregator framework does is it puts together a digital consent-based system whereby you can leverage your financial assets in order to get you financial benefits. And it could be any sort of product. So just let's take the simple example of a loan. Today, if you want to get a loan, you actually have to go to the guy who gives you the loan. You've got to give him a lot of paperwork. We all know that, and it's just, you know, if the paperwork is not perfect, you're not going to get the loan. What the account aggregator framework does is it allows you to pull, it allows the lender to pull based on the consent that you provide, so it's entirely within your control. It allows them to pull financial information directly from the financial service providers that you authorize to send to them in a digitally signed way. So that you could theoretically, in Mumbai, there was a demonstration of this. Literally, it takes 2 or 3 minutes to get this whole thing processed. But it's not just, I have, 10 lakhs in my bank account and so I'm entitled to a 1 lakh loan. The head of the GST network was there, and the GSTN is planned to be plugged into this. It will change from assets, which is the way in which loans are currently given, to flows, which is what is the type of incomes that your business has on a going basis. May not be the actual amount that you have in your bank account, but it is the transactions that you run through your system. And I think that is a very different way of looking at this. So these on the financial side are really powerful, and we're only going to see more and more of these built. But I'm going to say 2 or 3 weeks ago, the National Digital Health Mission actually released its blueprint. And the Digital Health Blueprint is another fascinating way in which the Indian government is thinking about digitization of the ecosystem. There's 23 building blocks in the Digital Health Mission's blueprint. That includes an anonymizer, it includes a consent manager. This is language that I've never heard any government speak before. But if you think about the health ecosystem, that's probably the ecosystem that's going to get the most benefit out of digitization. When we analyzed it, there are 12 to 15 stakeholders in the system. You just think about it. There's you, the patient, there's the doctor, there's the hospital, there's the pharmacist, there's the diagnostic laboratory, there's the researcher, there's the insurance company that's going to pay. There's a huge ecosystem that's at play. The data that's moving in this ecosystem is heavy data, MRI scans, vast amounts of information, medical information. But what's really powerful is if everyone in the ecosystem who is taking care of your health actually gets all the relevant data. When you go to a doctor, our doctors are miracle workers because they essentially have 3 to 4 minutes to tell you what's wrong with you on the basis of your imperfect recollection of what happened to you when you fell ill. And they still do pretty good to treat us all, for all of us to be healthy and sitting here. Now, can you imagine if you actually had a digital personal health record which has details of all of your medical interventions of all sorts? Because what do you need to know? You need to know what your allergies are. You need to know what medication you're currently on. Very often you don't have this, and we're not doctors. We don't know that if we go to a dentist, it's important to tell the dentist what my podiatrist did when I went to get my foot dealt with, but it may be important. So the only way to do that really is to create these sorts of digital tools. And the United States, ask anyone, any doctor, they've made a huge mess up of medical health because the systems just don't talk to each other. And I think President Obama invested a large amount of money trying to solve this, and it's probably gotten worse than it was before the intervention. So that's another area in which India has a huge opportunity to actually make a really big difference with digital technologies. Now, I want to end with something that I articulated in an article 2 or 3 weeks ago, and that is, how do we do this? And by we, I mean sort of people like me, and maybe people like you who are thinking about policy in this space. But lawyers who are looking to write laws in this space, it's the toughest thing to do. It's like that game of whack-a-mole, because whenever you whack a mole, another mole pops up somewhere else. And that's the problem with technology. It changes so fast that it is actually impossible to write laws that keep up with technology. But we still have to do it. And so in that article, I proposed a 3-step approach to thinking about technology policy in this area. And I'd like to sort of end with that for what it's worth. I think the first thing is, it's really important to understand what you are regulating. Because there is a tendency to react to the first bad, evil manifestation of a new technology. This is the reason why in Karnataka, Ola and Uber are registered as radio taxi operators. They're not radio taxi operators. Radio taxi operator regulations require you to put a physical meter into the radio taxi. And one of the miracles of Ola and Uber is you don't need a meter at all. And you get an accurate invoice of the distance that you went, and you're watching it real time. But the government tends to want to put you into a pigeonhole. Whichever pigeonhole they can find, the closest pigeonhole they can find, they'll stuff you into it, because that's the easiest thing to do. Otherwise, you've got to write a new law. And who has the time to write a new law? So it's really critical to try and figure out, are you worrying about metering, or are you worrying about passenger safety, driver welfare? And if you're worrying about passenger safety and driver welfare, the radio taxi regulations is the wrong place to stuff this in. So finding out the underlying technology and the underlying challenge is the most important thing. Second thing, regulate on the basis of principles. Why do I say this? Because most regulations tie themselves up in knots, trying to go into the last nitty-gritty detail of how to regulate this particular thing. And then by the time they've written the whole thing up, that technology is obsolete and there's something else that they should be regulating. So we've got to regulate on principles. And the Shri Krishna Committee's draft bill is a great example of this. They actually have principles. And they say that you are going to have to issue codes of practice depending on what each sector requires. And the third thing is a bit self-serving, but it is get help. Regulators, policymakers, lawyers, technologists, none of us can do this on our own. We need to find some amount of technology assistance in drafting regulations. We need to find some amount of regulatory assistance in making making the regulations effective. So how exactly do we get that balance? How exactly do we get that balance? Most technologists don't care for the law. And they'll say, look, the law is always going to be here. So let me create technology that will solve this. And that's the underlying reason for this digital consent infrastructure. Lawyers will say, look, technologists always think they can solve everything, but every technology that they have written has actually been messed up. We've got to have a balance of these two. And that is the way in which we've got to be looking at leveraging all of the benefits that technology can give us in this space.
Thank you. So we're already a little nearing the time, but we'll have one or two quick discussion and quickly open it up to Q&A. I think one of the words that I heard from both of you was evolving. So the question is, are we solving yesterday's problems, or are we solving also tomorrow's? And unfortunately, we haven't solved all of yesterday's challenges from a development perspective. So as we see technology growing, evolving, and so forth, what about trade-offs or winners and losers? Is there any sort of easy way to handle that? Because the traditional answer has been the market will figure it out. But as most of us would agree, the market is good at many things, it's not good at everything. And so issues of variance, issues of trade-off. So for example, your digitization score, you said India would be sort of in the mid-30s. Well, what about subnational issues, rural, urban issues, all sorts of layers? You look at electricity access, you see the same sort of data. We have dashboards and digital sort of, so you've got national, subnational, urban, regional, district, I mean, it gets even more and more. And that's missing from a lot of the conversation, in part because the market focuses on certain segments, rightly so, in some ways. So any sort of thoughts to either of you towards these?
Yeah, I think that's where the role for the government would be is how do we be equitable across these segments. This happens, I think, not uniquely for this, even for your infrastructure. Do we need to put a 6-lane highway in the urban areas, or do you want to put a 2-lane highway in a rural area? Again, it comes down to traffic congestion in this one, so let's have that one. A lot of the times that takes this thing, but in the rural areas, they say we don't even have any roads, so let's put one of this thing because that spurs economic growth. So it's again question of balance and trade-off and all that, and that's in the realm of policy and politics.
So agreed. So the government can do that through a planning mechanism. But if I look at digital tech, a lot of this is really the private sector that's up and using platforms or up and using third-party solutions and stuff, which we won't even get into the India versus global players side of it. So now is it that the government needs to step in and mandate, have minimum standards, performance standards, or how would that play out?
I mean, look, this winners and losers argument is a difficult one to have at in any stage of a technology discussion, because at every stage you are creating new winners at the cost of some old winners, right? So the old winners are losers as new technologies disrupt them. I mean, you look at the hotels, look at the newspapers. I mean, news has been fundamentally disrupted, and they are losers. But in the context of what the government has to do, the government has got to ensure that the incentives are structured so that they can achieve the good that the government is looking to achieve. Now, if you've got a commercially minded government that wants to get foreign direct investment in, they will incentivize that. I am not going to sit on this platform and say, what the government needs to do or what it should not do. But I am not going to stand and be an apologist for technology creating losers, because every technology will create a loser in a particular context.
So if we look at unintended consequences, we've heard about many of them, and you can't predict everything, you can't plan or fix everything a priori. The environment is one of the interesting ones, because what used to be a lot more local is now not going to be more local as you get network effects, winner takes all sort of phenomenon at one extreme. And forget the fact that why does that need to show up 4 hours later? But even if, Bitcoin reportedly consumes more energy than electricity than Ireland, as just one example. So are these some of the things that we need to start signaling for? So is it just that we need to price the externalities like electricity or carbon and that will fix it? Or is it that this disruption along its pathway needs those nudges as opposed to fixing it after or from outside?
So yeah, my sense is you're gonna have to keep fixing it on the fly. That's sort of the way, the only way you're going to be able to have some sort of control over technology, which necessarily means that you've got to have regulators and you've got to have legislators.
Sorry, regulator means digital like technology regulators. So who regulates this ecosystem that we're talking about?
I wouldn't like to. So because that would suggest that we're going to have someone who is a digital regulator whose remit will span competition law, financial services, and that would be hard to achieve. Mm-hmm. But I think regulators in general, when they are regulating technology, rather than looking to build these long-term solutions, are going to need to have to solve for the problems that come up on the margin. I mean, if you look at the point that you made on bias in algorithms, it's so hard to debias algorithms a priori. The best way to debias an algorithm is, look, this algorithm looks like it's, self-selecting for red-haired people. Now, if you are self-selecting for red-haired people, you won't know it until 500 red-haired people have got the job and only 100 non-red-haired people have got the job. You'll only find it then. Now, do you wait for 500 or do you get it at 50? If you can tune your solution, your regulation such that you'll catch it at 50, you're going to start doing regulation very differently. But you're going to start finding solutions to these problems that are probably going to be more appropriate for the pace at which technology changes.
So, one of the things with a lot of government regulations, they become static. And that's a problem with technology, because technology being very dynamic, and if your regulations are static, then there is a big gap. So regulations also have to become dynamic. And
that's why I said principles. Yeah. Once we've got the principle that we're regulating, then you can figure out the specific implementation of that principle in the context of e-commerce or in the context of automated delivery of goods or whatever.
Agreed. So, I mean, we see that in energy also. There's legislation, there's regulation, there's notification, then there's specifications, the spec, the numbers that you have to come to, like for pollutants. Legislation shouldn't get down to that level. So, we'll open it up for questions. If you could keep them brief, introduce yourself, and if they're directed to any particular